roar from the crowd, but a whisper that drifted out of a quiet room and into a noisy league. A warning, sharp as the edge of a locker room bench, said to be pointed at the newest star who had turned packed arenas into routine nights. The message traveled player to player, screen to screen, until it felt less like rumor and more like posture. This behavior won't be tolerated. The words hung in the air, heavy with all the things that had been left unsaid for years, and the league that had celebrated its bright rise suddenly found itself staring at the darker outline beneath the lights.
In the Annika Pro-Am, as it says here, it will take the Gamebridge ambassador Caitlin Clark returns to play this Wednesday. No, not this Wednesday.
Caitlin Clark had arrived carrying the electricity of a college legend and the baggage of everyone's expectations. She walked into the NBA with the soundtrack of sold-out gyms, record ratings, and a trail of headlines that promised a new age. Cameras followed her bus, microphones circled her warm-ups, and the league's social channels found daily reasons to spotlight her. It was effortless to believe that visibility would solve everything, but inside the lines, where elbows sharpen and whistles waver, the game still demanded proof on every possession. Clark's introduction to that reality was fast, hard, and increasingly public. It started with body checks that became arguments, arguments that became debates, debates that became a referendum on the league's soul. A shoulder in the back away from the ball, a hard closeout at the arc, a forearm that rode the ribs a beat too long. Some nights they were common fouls. Other nights they were upgraded after review. Commentators fought over the interpretation while the clips ran on loop. Was it a veteran testing a rookie? Or was it something uglier, a willingness to rough up the league's new face because eyes were finally watching?
Obviously, I did not make those comments. Caitlin has been a transformational player in this league. She's been a great representative of the game.
Each incident hardened the lines between those who saw toughness and those who saw needless risk.
On benches and in group texts, the murmur grew. Indiana's coaches pleaded for a semblance of consistency, and teammates stepped into the fray with a ferocity that bordered on reckless, because that's what loyalty looks like when games blur into a trench.
I'm just so proud of with this group is it doesn't matter who's on the floor, it doesn't matter who's on our roster. They give each other the freedom to be themselves.
A shove answered a shove. A stare answered a smirk. It was supposed to be simple. Keep your star upright, keep your locker room together, keep your season alive. But every collision turned into a screenshot, and every screenshot turned into an argument about protection, privilege, and the shape of respect. Officials found themselves wedged between the speed of a new era and the procedures of an old one. Some nights the whistle came late and tight. Other nights it vanished under the roar. Technicals began to stack like loose bricks, a portrait of a rookie who played near the flame and sometimes too close. A slap of the stanchion in frustration, a shouted word that bled into a second, a sarcastic smile that was read as dissent. The league office kept score just as carefully as the stat crew. Fines appeared for small jabs online, reminders that public commentary about referees, even in a joke, had a cost. Each letter felt like a tap on the wrist, and to the players who felt unprotected, a slap in the face. Around the league, veterans sighed at the discourse because they recognized an old rhythm. When a star arrives, she becomes a mirror. Everything the WNBA had postponed, everything it had handled quietly, everything it had learned to play through, now reflected with brutal clarity. The workouts that ended with ice bags and no complaints, the flights that prioritized budgets over bodies, the awareness that to be seen, you had to grind, and once you were finally seen, you had to smile. Clark's presence did not create those tensions, it exposed them, and exposure made everyone uncomfortable. Then came the piece that turned discomfort into confrontation. A respected player, calm and deliberate, stepped to a podium and read words that felt like a hammer. Leadership, she said, had dismissed concerns with arrogance. Gratitude was being used like a leash. Young stars were told, in essence, to remember who gave them a stage.
Engelbert, those comments actually referenced Fever superstar Caitlin Clark at one point. saying that she was once having a conversation with Engelbert about...
Behind the podium sat years of unspoken resentment. In front of it stood cameras hungry for confirmation. Support rippled across locker rooms as if players had agreed on a signal in advance. They posted, they texted, they nodded in practice gyms and hotel hallways. It was not a spontaneous uprising, but a recognition that someone had finally said the quiet part out loud.
The commissioner denied the harshest phrasing. She spoke of respect, of misinformation, of the work required to build a league that has never had it easy. She promised to do better, to rebuild trust, to listen. It might have worked in another year, another news cycle, another stage of growth. Shrugged at the idea of a stoppage, now spoke in terms of lines and leverage. Owners felt the air tighten. Sponsors watched closely. The story was no longer whether the league was rising. It was whether it could rise without tearing itself apart. At the center of this shifting ground stood Clark, sidelined by injuries that arrived like unwelcome punctuation marks. She cheered in a sweatshirt while teammates battled, and in those moments, her voice from the bench became its own form of spotlight. A sarcastic traveling motion after a missed call sent the internet into hysterics, and a reverent comment online about referees earned a fine that barely registered as a dollar amount, but thundered as a message. Even absent from the floor, she could not step out of the narrative. She was the fault line and the foundation all at once.
And we have to talk about the biggest storyline of the WNBA season outside of Caitlin Clark getting hurt, outside of the Fever magical run. That is the WNBA referees, man. There has been a lot of...
The player whose name drew more eyes and more scrutiny than any rookie in memory. What was the behavior that wouldn't be tolerated? Public criticism of officiating, said the letters. A lack of gratitude, said the whispers. A refusal to play small, said the body language of teammates who weren't backing down. Each answer reveals a different layer of the iceberg that hides beneath a breakout season. At the surface is a simple story about rough play and rookie growing pains. Just beneath it runs the current of broadcast deals, ticket surges, and the mismatch between what players bring in and what paychecks reflect. Deeper still lies the muscle memory of a league that has taught its athletes to be humble because the margins were thin, now encountering a generation that sees humility as a choice, not a condition of employment.
Every era has a star who becomes a case study for how power flows. Clark's college success didn't just break viewing records, it proved that women's basketball could command mass attention when given a proper stage.
So I think those were two of my biggest goals. And then obviously college basketball has come true, and then hopefully the WNBA here very shortly. But I think as a young girl...
That success created an awkward inheritance. She entered the W with an audience the league needed, and the league offered her a structure it insisted she respect. The tension between audience and structure is the dark seam that runs through every dispute. When a foul escalates into a talking point, it's because that seam is tugging from both ends. When a fine makes national news, it's because the seam is fraying. Players talk about protection in two languages. The first is the game itself. Space to land on a jumper, a whistle for a hip check, a line between strength and recklessness that must be honored by defenders and referees. The second is the ecosystem around the game. Charters, or at least sensible travel. Medical support that reflects elite performance. Scheduling that doesn't treat recovery as an afterthought. They want respect inside the lines and care outside them. Clark's clashes became a referendum on both languages because she lives at the intersection where the product meets the promise. Media narratives add their own layer of distortion. Some voices who rarely watched the league suddenly became experts on what it means to play hard, misreading the sports culture through the narrow lens of a clip. Others who had paid attention forever rolled their eyes at newcomers brandishing outrage without understanding context. The worst currents dragged identity into it, flattening complex athletes into stereotypes, recasting legitimate questions about officiating into ugly insinuations about who deserves protection and why. In that noise, nuance is the first casualty. Players see the backlash, feel the harassment, and wonder where the league's public spine is when they are targeted for existing.
Inside franchises, coaches and teammates walk a line between advocacy and escalation. Speak too softly and your star is unguarded. Shout too loudly and you fuel the narrative that you think the rules shouldn't apply. The difference between those two positions is not measured on paper, but in the posture of a huddle and the confidence of a player stepping into a deep three. Indiana's locker room, like any locker room orbiting a meteoric talent, became a laboratory for loyalty. Teammates took technicals to interrupt what they believed was a pattern. Coaches absorbed fines to say what players couldn't. A bench rose as one when whistles went silent, and in doing so, told the league that silence from above felt like complicity. The commissioner's job is a contradictory art. Growth demands spotlight moments, but spotlight moments magnify every flaw.
A conversation that she had with the commissioner where she alleged Commissioner Engelbert said some things. One of them being that the players should be on their knees thanking her for the media rights deal, and that Caitlin Clark, is lucky to have, the opportunities that she has off the court.
Sponsors want certainty. Networks want consistency. Owners want stability. Players want progress. And fans want drama, as long as no one gets hurt. When any commissioner chooses language that sounds like a lecture to those who sweat for the product, the room drops 10 degrees. When she insists the words were twisted, the players remember not just the disputed sentence, but the feeling of being dismissed. Trust is not won by a single town hall or an apology at a podium. It is built by the boring, relentless work of proving that decisions come from care rather than control. Beneath the governance layer lies the machinery of money. Bigger ratings join hands with bigger expectations, and the gap between off-court earnings and league salaries becomes the kind of graph that starts conversations at bargaining tables.
WNBA players want as much money as the NBA players. So the NBA actually generates extreme amounts of revenue. Somebody wrote a joke about it. The WNBA wanted what their just pay was, and so they owe.
A generation raised on player empowerment understands that followers are leverage, not a favor. They know that a bus rolling behind their name is not charity from the league, but an engine both sides should maintain. When a star is told to be grateful for the platform, she can rightfully respond that the platform is grateful for the star. Neither statement is the whole truth. Together, they describe a partnership that must be renegotiated with clear eyes.
Fans are not bystanders in this tension. They buy tickets to see the best and worry when the best spend more time on the floor than on their feet. They celebrate emotion and then bristle when that emotion crosses into protest. They defend their favorite players with a zeal that can curdle into harassment aimed at opponents, a toxic undertow that teams and leagues are perpetually too slow to address. When a guard who played hard against Clark awakens to threats and cameras in the hotel lobby, no scoreboard can justify the risk. It is on leadership to draw bright lines protecting everyone, star and rival alike, and to do it publicly so the message reaches beyond the arena. The union's voice grew louder as players realized their grievances were not isolated. Group chats became strategy sessions. End-of-season interviews became sharpened statements. Words like lockout and strike moved from hypothetical to practical. This is the part of the iceberg that cannot be ignored because it is not just about a whistle or a headline, it is about the foundation of the league's promises. The players are saying that gratitude will not replace guarantees, that respect must be visible in policy, not just in branding. Clark's reaction to the swell around her has been a study in balance. She backs teammates without pouring gasoline on the officiating discourse. She owns her temper without pretending she will play with the volume turned down. She accepts fines with a shrug that communicates both humor and defiance. She praises the league's growth while quietly pointing at the structural places that do not yet match the scale of its ambition. Her greatest disruption may not be a 30-footer in transition, but the ordinary, stubborn insistence that she will be herself in full view of the biggest audience the W has ever had. The locker room legend of the warning, whether perfectly accurate or not, distills the conflict. Do not embarrass us. Do not get bigger than us. Do not forget who steers this ship. But the players hear a different echo. Do not diminish us.
Do not pretend the ship sails without us. Do not ask for thanks while ignoring the leaks beneath our feet. 2 sentences, mirror images, colliding in a pivotal moment for a league that has fought too hard to reach this shoreline.
What does tolerance look like in a league that wants to be both edgy and elegant, both physical and safe, both player-driven and brand-conscious? It looks like officials trained to anticipate the kind of contact that stars draw without reducing the sport to touch fouls. It looks like discipline that is clear and consistent, so that a sarcastic gesture from the bench does not earn the same public weight as an intentional hit in the lane. It looks like executives who pick up the phone before emotions calcify, listening to veterans and rookies with the same attention they give to sponsors. It looks like a travel schedule and medical ecosystem that dignify the effort it takes to play this beautifully violent game at the highest level. The dark side of a rise is the temptation to control rather than collaborate. The league wants a headline that says everything is fine, upward, inevitable. The players want a reality where upward does not mean disposable. Clark's meteoric attention has cracked open the sealed room where those truths negotiate, and sunlight is rarely gentle the first time it floods in. Some things will wilt, other things will grow. The question is whether leadership can tend the garden without resenting the flowers. There is a version of the near future where the warning becomes a footnote. The commissioner meets players often and early. The next CBA lands with relief. Referees are evaluated with transparency. Fines exist, but the explanations are public and specific. Broadcasts celebrate rivalries without baiting vendettas, and the most shared clips of the season are about cutthroat shot-making rather than slow-motion collisions. Fans learn to cheer intensely while keeping the hate off the players' phones. In that future, Clark is the headliner of a thriving ensemble, not the lightning rod for an old grudge between control and voice.
There is another version where the warning becomes a prophecy. A bargaining impasse stretches into winter. Players stay unified. Owners test resolve. Social feeds fill with nostalgia for what might have been. Trust frays beyond repair between locker rooms and the office. The league enters the spring with bruises no marketing campaign can cover. In that world, behavior on both sides becomes the story. Every smile is read as betrayal. Every statement becomes a referendum. The games, when they return, carry a colder edge. The rise stalls not because the product isn't magnificent, but because the partnership forgot how to act like one. The most likely outcome is between those two extremes, because that is where sport tends to live. Pressure creates clarity. Clarity forces decisions, and decisions, once made, form the culture people feel every day. If the warning truly matters, it will matter not as a scolding of a single player, but as a reminder that tone from the top multiplies in 1,000 small ways. The same is true for the player's tone. Fury must become proposal, not just performance. Veterans know this, rookies learn it quickly. Stars like Clark become the translators between urgency and strategy. For now, the cameras keep rolling. Clark rehabs, jokes with teammates, studiously avoids saying the one thing that would turn a tense relationship into a war. The commissioner makes rounds, emphasizes progress, insists that criticism is part of growth, weighs every phrase as if it might be headline bait. Coaches draw plays with a sense that each possession lives on after the buzzer in 1,000 comment sections. Teammates look at each other in walkthroughs and recommit to the simple pact of team sports. I will have your back publicly and challenge you privately.
The iceberg always looks immovable until the ship steers. What sits beneath the waterline of the WNBA is not mysterious anymore. It is the unpaid interest on years of survival mode. It is the expectation that joy should be quiet. It is the habit of brushing aside the worst nights because the best nights make such pretty pictures. The players have carved their initials into that ice and said it will not drift untouched any longer. The league can read that carving as rebellion or as guidance. How it reads it will determine whether this period is remembered as the start of a golden era or the beginning of a long standoff. Clark will return to the court, and when she does, the ball will feel familiar in her hands. The step back will still draw breath from a building. The stare down after a big three will still travel farther than the shot itself. The game will do what it always does: invite excellence, punish hesitation, reward nerve. What surrounds the game will either match that purity or pollute it. The warning that traveled through the league is, at its core, a choice. Tolerate courage and individuality, or tolerate the slow erosion that follows when players stop believing the people in charge respect the stakes they live with every day. In the silence after a final buzzer, when trainers pack tape and cameras power down, the league's future does not sit in the rafters. It sits in two places: a conference room where words must be chosen with care, and a weight room where sweat has no patience for bureaucracy. If those rooms can reflect each other with honesty, the WNBA will transform tension into momentum. If they echo with resentment, it will not matter how high the ratings climb. The dark side will claim the glow for itself. Some nights, the storm will pass and leave the sky clear enough to see what was always there: athletes who carry the weight of a sport they love, leaders who must learn how to serve that love, and fans who are finally discovering what they've been missing. The warning will fade into a lesson. The lesson will crystallize into a standard, and the standard will tell everyone what is and isn't tolerated without a whisper ever needing to leave a closed door again.